Okay. So, how did your family deal with the Great Depression?
My father started his construction business in 1908. When the Depression hit, he had a subdivision of houses. When you talk of subdivision in those days, maybe 12 or 15 houses, but he had those under construction. But people didn't have the ability to buy a house. So he was left with large bills for lumber and other building products. He was encouraged to take out bankruptcy, but he refused to do so. Anderson Lumber down in Ogden went along with him. Finally, in 1946, he finished paying off his indebtedness to Anderson Lumber Company. But some way, somehow, and it's lost in our history, he ended up with 3 little farms in South Weber. All right. One of them had a lot of fruit on it. Apple trees, pear trees, something like 12 or 15 varieties of apple, several varieties of cherries, peaches, apricots, raspberries, rhubarb, grapes, you name it, it was on that little farm. All right. We also had dairy cows. We also had the horses. We had a lot of pigs. So those little farms not only saved our family, but many of our neighbors also profited from being able to get vegetables and fruit and eggs and meat off of our farms.
Mm-hmm.
So they were a blessing, and I don't know how, in some way, in the exchange of homes for farms, but we are not sure now just how Daddy maneuvered that. But we had the farms through the Depression, through the war, and he finally sold the last farm when I was a senior in high school in 1949. But we probably a couple of thousand bushel of fruit, and we distributed most of that to the 2 or 3 large grocery stores in Ogden in exchange for food from the grocery store. So you might say there was a lot of bartering, not just exchange of money, but exchange of produce for groceries, etc. All right. Oh, a lot of unemployment. But Ogden area was blessed because of the railroad. But there were still a lot of transits that came through because of the railroad. In other parts of the country, they'd hop on the freight trains and come into the cities. You had very few women folk, but a lot of men folk. There were 2 words, a tramp and a bum. You know the difference? A tramp wanted a handout without any responsibility. A bum wanted to do some work in exchange for some money or some food. All right. Oh, there were a lot of them in the neighborhood all through the Depression, but Ogden maybe was better off than most communities because of the railroad.
So, before the war started, did you have siblings that had to work because of the Depression, or how did that work?
Daddy kept his construction license active. We had little remodeling projects going. I learned how to handle a handsaw and a level and a hammer. Actually built a little reading room in our first grade classroom when I was in the first grade. That little reading room stayed there for 15, 20 years. Got a little letter from Anna in the mission field praising me for being able to build that little reading room when I was just, so we kept, but Daddy became a public official, a city commissioner. There were 2 commissioners and a mayor. So that job really saved the family along with the farm. Does that answer the question? Or?
Yeah, that was good.
All right, so we were still with the big family. Those public positions weren't high-paying positions, but they were steady employment. Health care was cheap. If you got sick, the doctor would come right to your house. So we were better off than most families in that Daddy had that steady employment. A lot of families were fine because of the railroad, but a lot still suffered with the lack of jobs.
So, okay, so you had 12 kids. So where do you fit in
I'm
that?
number 10. Uncle Edward married in 1932. So when the Depression hit, Marsh and Darrell had not been born. I was born, well, I hadn't been born when the Depression hit, but 3 of us were born 31, 33, and 34, 1931. So the last 3 of us. And by that time, Edward had married. The next one to marry was clear into the 1940s.
Okay, so how did you first hear about World War II?
Radio and newspaper. Everybody took the daily newspaper. There were no televisions. Oh, but everybody had a radio. So you had instead of television shows, you had radio shows. The Lone Ranger, Inner Sanctum Mystery, the sound effects. They always started with a creaking door. So they had marvelous
background
background
noises to make it sound authentic.
Oh, but radio and newspaper is how we kept abreast. And at the movies, they always had newsreels.
Yeah.
So that's where we would actually get pictures of what was going on, was with the newsreels that would show in between the movies. Most of the movies were double features in those days. All right. And then in between you'd have a cartoon and a newsreel.
So do you remember where you were or what you were thinking when you first heard that world, like about Pearl Harbor and that we were in the war?
Well, our first exposure to the war in Europe, I've already shared that with you with Anna's experience. All right, but it started for earnest when Hitler moved into Poland.
I have a question. So, when you first read about it in the newspaper, would you talk about it as a family, or yeah? But so the United States didn't get involved for a long time. Were you thinking that you weren't going to get involved at all?
Oh, I think we were sure that we were going to get involved in Europe. All right. This just remember, this is just a little over 20 years after the end of World War I. So there were a lot of veterans that still alive, a lot of the fathers in their 40s and in their 50s that had fought in World War I. So it was just a matter of time as far as our entry into the war with Germany. But with the Japanese, it shouldn't have been as big a surprise as it was, but it was a surprise. That I remember that Sunday morning, there was a special piece of news. The paper would come out with a special. All right. And the newsboys that delivered the daily papers, most of them delivered, they were just young fellows that, for the most part, or some cases, the young ladies were the paper boys. All right. And if there was a special edition, they would walk up and down the street announcing. And we don't use the term Japs, but it was a nickname. Just Negroes. We don't use the term nigger, but they were commonly used words, and people didn't really look upon them as being derogatory. But that Sunday morning early, we were awakened with the newspaper boy, Japs bomb Pearl Harbor, and it caught the whole nation, I think, by surprise. And of course, President Roosevelt, his famous radio speech, the day that will go down in infamy. And we immediately then were involved in the war with Germany, Italy, and Japan.
Okay, so what is the most predominant memory you have of World War times? Can you think of anything specific that you remember?
She can tell you a little bit. I was cheated